In this episode, I talk Busted, McFly, 2000s guitar music, and a whole lot more with radio presenter Danny Simm. Then, podcaster Jack Haywood is our guest in the Empty Compartment.
This is 90s and Noughties UK, a podcast on UK pop culture of the 90s and 2000s. If you want to contact the show, email 90esandnoughties@gmail.com, tweet us on @90esandnoughties UK on Twitter, or check us out on Facebook, 90s and Noughties UK.
This is the 90s and Noughties UK podcast. I'm joined by Danny Simm, who's here to talk about a very particular time in music. The early 2000s were a hotbed for guitar bands. At the turn of the millennium, there were loads of bands that came on the scene, the likes of Blink-182, Sum 41. They might have been around for a while, of course, but the really hit the mainstream. Then a couple of years in, a band came into being called Busted, who were sort of part boy band, part rock band. And this is half of what we're going to be talking about today. Thanks, Danny, for joining us. When did you first discover Busted?
Oh, right. So it would have been 2002, I think. Around the time the first ever single came out. So I would have been 4 or 5 years old, right? 4 or 5 years old. And I used to be obsessed. And it's something that I really wish was still around. Unfortunately, it's not on TV anymore. And for the life of me, right, I tried Googling this for ages earlier, couldn't find it. But there used to be a kids channel. And this kids channel showed it showed a few programs, but it would frequently just run with like half an hour of music videos. I can't remember what it was. I used to be watching loads of stuff like Power Rangers, Time Force, and Wild Force at the time, and it was somewhere around that block of programming, and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon as well. And one day, the music video for It's What I Go to School For came on. I was hooked straight away. I immediately envisioned myself as a rock star, and was in particular my favorite was always Matt Willis. So I always wanted to play bass like him, and it was amazing at the time. Like, they were definitely my favorite band and probably the most formative band from that era. They were so important musically at the time, like for the charts and in the direction of where music went for the early to late noughties. But for me personally as well, like, it was absolutely incredible. That Christmas, my mum and dad bought me my first ever guitar. I learned how to play one song, which was Get Back by the Beatles, signed me nan as my manager, and did a concert on Boxing Day for the family.
That's lovely, isn't it?
It is. They are. There was a lot, like, in the early 2000s. I think, to be honest, it probably started, in my opinion, this is only ever my opinion, I'm not trying to shout out any hard facts, but I can only explain it how I've ever perceived it, which was American Pie came out in 1999 and was obviously a massive sensation. And one thing that people, a lot of American Pie has not aged well. In particular, I showed it to my like hyper feminist girlfriend, and she shouted at me. So it's not aged well. One thing that has, though, is the music, the soundtrack, because the soundtrack to American Pie was loaded at the time with Offspring, Blink, Green Day. I mean, Green Day had been going since 1987, but like, I feel like the 90s was a big kickoff for them. Because that movie was such a big hit, that style, that pop punk, that pop rock started to drift into the mainstream, in particular in America. But it started very swiftly over here because of American Pie, I think. And I feel like Busted, where it was, as soon as that happened, Busted were gonna have. It was like a Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark with the rolling ball. It was like that. The rolling ball was the American Pie soundtrack, and at the end of the cave was like a Busted, and it was gonna get there until you had that British pop rock band, and that's what they were, and they dominated like with their singles, their albums. They were all over the TV, the movie, Thunderbirds, like all of it. It's unreal.
Yeah, you see, I perceived it slightly differently. They just seemed like, to me, they seemed almost like Westlife, but with guitars.
Really?
Yeah, like they seemed more boy bandy, and I think that's because they appeared on the front cover of Smash Hits, and I'm sure I remember seeing that and reading it, and they were shooting the music video for What I Go to School For, and it seemed very much in the mould of sort of the more manufactured side of things. So yeah, I didn't quite perceive it like that, but actually listening to a lot of it now and knowing that they played a lot of their own instruments and wrote a lot of the songs themselves, Year 3000 being one of the operative ones, even though it sounds like it was written by a bunch of men in a boarding room, but actually, it's pretty credible.
It was written at a piano in Southend-on-Sea.
Yeah.
By one of the band. And that's what I think I liked about Busted. And bearing in mind as well my age at the time, I was 5 to 8 while Busted were around. So I never perceived them as manufactured. I only ever had a child's view of it, which was it is what it is, and it's what it was put in front of you, and it's pop rock. Over the years, I wouldn't ever say like they were manufactured. I think they were marketed as a pop band, but were actually a real band marketed as a pop band. And I think that's why they were so successful. They took those lessons that had been learned from Westlife and Boyzone, Girls Aloud, these pop groups, which were manufactured. They sort of decided, well, it's only the same as if me and you, Jamie, decided to start a skiffle group. And we were like, right, well, what works well for Drake? Right, he's on spot. And we just followed the same methods. And I feel like it was just a different band, same method. And that's why so many people think that it's manufactured boy band. When they will actually, no.
No, there was a lot more going on there. And sadly, in the mid-2000s, they split up. I mean, you must have been quite young at the time. How did you feel?
I cried. I did. 2004, they released, that was when they did the Thunderbirds movie. And just to add some context to this, my childhood interests at the time were ITV's reruns of Thunderbirds and Busted's music. So then one day they make a Busted film, a Thunderbirds film, and Busted's in it. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to need to get every day off school here to go and see this every day in the cinema. So they were riding on this high. For 2004, I was really, really excited. And then literally first thing, January 2005, press conference, they've split up. I cried. I did. I was really, really, really upset because I was like, oh no, it's over. There's nothing happening now, and it was really gutting at the time. It was really upsetting.
I know that there will be many fans out there that will agree with you on that. But about the time that they split up, they helped to introduce another band into the mainstream, which is the other half of the puzzle, as it were, today. McFly.
McFly are a good one. I always preferred Busted to McFly. Purely because I think Busted rock harder. It's that simple. I've been to McFly gigs, I've been to Busted gigs, but I always had the better time at Busted gigs. Yeah, McFly were very good. I had James from Busted on my radio show last week, and we talked about actually the formation of McFly, basically because obviously Tom from McFly was in Busted originally. And then kicked out when they wanted to release it as a free piece. But James and Tom had wrote these songs, which eventually turned into like McFly songs, and that was how that happened. And McFly have always felt more homely, I suppose. Busted to me were rock and roll. I remember newspapers, and they'd put people like Amy Winehouse and Matt Willis together. You wouldn't have that with McFly. They were very happy. They were on the CBBC quite a lot. I used to remember like tuning into that, and McFly would be on CBBC, whereas Busted, I don't think, especially with a few of the issues that were plaguing the members at the time, would have done that whole thing. So McFly always felt more comfortable. They always felt more like, oh, well, let's sit around the fire and put a McFly album on, not let's down a bottle of vodka, smash a window and listen to Busted, which I've never done.
That's a very interesting way of looking at it, and I did think that McFly were throwback. I mean, I've been listening to some stuff before I come on to here, and there's a lot of throwbacks to a lot of 60s material. I mean, you know, tracks on their first album. There was one called like Surfer Babe or something.
I love Surfer Babe. It's all beach. It's essentially a Beach Boys album. That first,
yeah.
There's what is it? For the riff to Five Colors in a Her. If you move like two notes around, it's essentially just "I'm a Believer" by the Monkees, and all that sort of thing. It's brilliant, and they use so much of that brilliant surf rock, which was in particular, it was so prevalent in early Beach Boys stuff. Surfing USA, Surfing California. Big fans of water, the Beach Boys, believe it or not. And McFly took that, and they did wonderful things with it in that first album. It was fantastic. Room on the Third Floor was one of the best debut albums for a British band ever. It was incredible, because I feel like what McFly did was what Busted never did. McFly grew up like as a band. So obviously with Busted, you got the two albums, and then they went. Whereas McFly, for me, and maybe I perceive them differently because they've always been around, really. Like, and when they've not been touring, they're always on TV. You know, like the members are those sort of family-friendly ITV2 chat show types. So they're always about, whereas you didn't really get that from Busted, especially after the breakup, when, other than Matt winning the I'm a Celebrity, there wasn't much going on from the rest of them in the mainstream. And particularly me at 9 or 10 years old at that point.
Although, as a side note, Matt Willis's solo album was extremely good, and that reminded me of Green Day and that kind of sound. And again, further strengthens what you were saying about Busted.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of, in particular with James and Matt, I feel like they had this music that was becoming popular towards like 99 to 2000. Again, like I thought, because of American Pie, and it's like you can hear it, and particularly in Matt's solo album, and especially in the second Busted album, the more grown-up one. Each of the band has their song, and Matt's it's a Green Day song, and it's fantastic. Aside
from Matt, the other two went on to do other things as well, solo, and in bands, because Charlie went straight into Fight Star.
Yeah, I never listened to them.
Have you not?
Met them, lovely people, but they broke up Busted, man. Like, call me sour, but it has only been 15 years.
That's an interesting point of view, because I was listening to some before this, and yeah, it's a lot heavier. And I know that there are people who've been in, let's just say in quotations, pop bands who want something a bit harder, and they go off and do stuff. And that's what that sounded like to me. He wanted that much harder sound, and he did some stuff solo as well. And of course, now they're back together, as it were. They released their comeback album Night Driver in 2016, which was very good. I enjoyed that. I bought the vinyl. It looks great on vinyl. And obviously just released a fairly recent album, which went back to that sound after the very much... I remember somebody coming in to my house once as I was playing Night Driver, and they said, oh, that's bitty music, like computerized synths, like almost like 16-bit SNES music. Some of it sounds a little bit throwbacky like that, but this new album, from what I hear, sounds a lot more close to what they originally intended.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, because I really liked the balls of Busted when they came back to completely say goodbye to their old sound and reinvent themselves as a new band, a grown-up band making modern pop. And in particular in 2016, when that album came out, there was a big, because obviously Stranger Things had just, there was this whole 80s vibe going on. So it was very logical and very sensible of them to capitalize on a mainstream trending topic like that. And in particular as well, to be like, oh yeah, Busted are back, but not like you think. They're not back, they're back. Do you know what I mean? And A Night Driver was fantastic. It was particularly fun to me because I was quite good friends with James's little brother Chris, and we'd planned on my agent at the time, Guy Lambert, for he made a documentary with me and Chris when Chris was doing his own tour because he's a soloist, and I believe there was some sort of like some really good chemistry between us when we did it, and there was like we got along really, really well, and he sort of spurred us on to do this to do a vlog series together. So then one day, and we said we'd do it. We had no plans like what we were going to do in it or anything. But one day, Chris phones me up. He says, "Danny, what are you doing tomorrow?" I said, "To be honest, no, nothing really. Like just sat here in Wigan, watching the clouds go by. That's what you do. Go down a pit, down the mines, whatever." But he said, "Well, can you cancel all your plans for the next month?" And I was like, "Well, why?" And he was like, "Because basically, as you know, like the Busted tour starts tomorrow in Norwich, and I need your help, like on like helping out on the road." And I was like, "Oh, okay." Packed a bag, gone. Literally, I said ta-ra to my parents, and was like, "I'll see you in a month." And I just went. I packed a little like a little rucksack, put my snapback on, left. Got on the quiet carriage to Norwich. It was fantastic. And then The Night Driver, and obviously the album had come out, and it was the end of January 2017. The gigs were phenomenal. They had an incredible production. It was much smaller venues, 1,000, 2,000 capacity clubs. And they departed so much from that old vibe. They'd even reworked some of their original songs to have different parts in it to match their new sound. Oh, it was fantastic. That was one hell of a tour. It was brilliant. I didn't like the new album because I think I don't think they should have gone back to that old sound. They made a nostalgia album. Props to them. It probably made them more money than Night Driver did, but I didn't care for it. And it's not a view I sort of shy away from. It was like, okay, but you did this 10 years ago. What are you doing? What's now? What's in your head now? You have to listen to Charlie's solo album or James's new solo stuff to hear that there is such fantastic, intricate musicianship and songwriting with those three guys. They are masters of their craft. You know, there ain't nothing manufactured about them. They are very, very good at what they do. And they just come back to 3-4 chord guitar pop. And it's like, didn't do it for me, sadly.
Let's go back a moment. I mean, what a story. You end up essentially going on tour with Busted, which is incredible. That's incredible in itself. And you were right with Night Driver. It was very different. And of course, this new album, recent album that came out, is very throwbacky to that original sound. And it is kind of disappointing because you want them to almost like reinvent themselves like they did with the previous album. But to go back all the way back, what is your favourite Busted single that they released during their first tenure? And I realise that that's a really hard question because, you've got so many great tracks in there. Sleeping with the Light On, Who's David, Crashed a Wedding, Year 3000, What I Go to School For.
My personal favourite has changed. As a kid, it was Thunderbirds I Go. That was the song. It combined everything I loved about the world at the time, and I got the CD and just looped it and looped it and looped it till everyone around me had gone mad. I got my Tracy Island took off me that week, but now, like looking back at it at 23 and being objective about the music and having now become essentially like a really half-assed musician. But being able to notice songwriting and composition like that, I would have to say Who's David, because it's such a fantastic song. And as my previous relationships I've had have always usually ended up with me being cheated on. So there's always been that confrontation where I've had to have on like 3 separate occasions. All right, who's David? Do you know what I mean? So maybe it's that, but definitely Who's David, I think is the best that they've ever done musically. The orchestra in it, the strings, da 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 da. It climbs on you. It's wonderful, and I'm so here for Who's David. You could, doesn't matter what mood I'm in. Yeah, you put that song on, I'll be dancing.
I can tell by talking to you now, it's incredibly relatable, as should a pop song be. It's supposed to be relatable. Now, I realise for any Busted fans that have tuned in, sure, yeah, great, we're getting what we want. But the McFly fans might feel that Busted have crashed it slightly.
No.
I think we might need to go back to McFly for even just a moment. I know that they're almost, in this instance, you said you prefer one over the other, but since we are talking about that wonderful period of time in the early 2000s, which I suppose kind of came to a head once Busted had split up, because suddenly you had this big deluge of guitar bands. You had people like The Feeling and The Killers and all this stuff.
You keep saying things as I think them. Like, as you said, guitar bands, I was like, yeah, The Feeling. The Feeling are fantastic. I really, really love The Feeling, and I really like that that sort of 2004, 2005 breaking point gave way to so many wonderful songs, but not even in the mainstream guitar pop. I think you had bands like the Cribs, Arctic Monkeys, indie bands who became more popular in that era. And believe it or not, I believe that if you trace it back far enough, you are Busted to thank for it. Sorry. But it's true.
No, again, that's completely okay. Because, I remember being at college around 06, 07, guitar bands were absolutely everywhere. Snow Patrol were in the charts for about 1 million weeks with Chasing Cars. That seemed to be, huge for a very long period of time. And I reminded myself earlier that McFly, to go on to McFly, even just for a second, that Top Gear did a comic relief mashup, if you remember, with Top of the Pops, in which McFly were a guest, and they got them to write a song, and it turned out just to be a 12-bar. And they got them to write a song in like half an hour using the words sofa, Hyundai, and administration. And yeah, it was great, wasn't it?
Was that the one that ended with them and Justin Hawkins singing "Red Light Spells Danger"?
Quite possibly. I haven't seen the full show for a long time.
Which is a great version. It's a great version, Like, I think it's Jeremy Clarkson playing the drums. And Justin Hawkins singing, and they perform "Red Light Spells Danger" at the end of the show, like over the credits, and it's great. McFly are fantastic. Right? Sorry, I'm not giving them enough credit. McFly are absolutely fantastic. They had an astonishing first album, right, with their surf pop, Room on the Third Floor vibe. It was amazing. And they did something very, very clever with their second album, which they essentially reinvented their sound, and it's something McFly have done every single album. They've reinvented their sound, which is, I think, is a commendation to their longevity as a group, because they never get stale. The second album became a lot more soft pop. It became a bit more friendly. It felt like you weren't listening to teenagers anymore, because obviously, like even Dougie was 15 when McFly were formed, so they were very, very young for that first album. But the second album, and then the movie as well, because they had a movie, didn't they? So Busted had the fun was, but McFly had Just My Luck with Lindsay Lohan, which was a great film. And then they re-released a compilation McFly album as their first American album, and they did a much heavier version of 5 Colors.
Oh my goodness! I mean, I listened to that earlier, and I was like, "What have they done to it?" I was quite disappointed. I was like, but But I don't know whether maybe an American executive went, it sounds like the Beatles. It shouldn't sound like the Beatles. It's like, well, it kind of needs to, because it was the throwback that everybody wanted.
Yes, I feel like some executive in America somewhere was just like, all right, just turn up the gain, because it's something, maybe it's a British thing. Maybe it's just because we're British, but they were always very clean cut, very good, and they always appeared to have the right etiquette, the right behavior, the right mannerisms. They were a very well behaved band. And I feel like when they've gone to America, because obviously America is not like us. We're obviously culturally worlds away from America. They're a lot more extroverted. They're a lot more outgoing. They have a lot more like gas inside them, as it were. And you get that with that McFly album that they released in America. It's just, they've clearly got it's more or less the same rhythm, because you can break it down by listening to the track, right? So you've got the same bass lines, you've got the same rhythm guitars. They've turned the gain up on the lead guitars. That's it. And they've just done some, like, either turned the drums up or made them a bit thrashier. But it gives the album, in particular that song Five Colours, more spunk to it, more power. And that's what I suppose, because obviously for them it'd been 3-4 years since they did Five Colours in Your Hair. So, they probably wanted to change things up.
Yeah, and it certainly shows that the American market is occasionally different to this one. Now, to go back once again, you name dropped, because I mentioned that Top Gear special, which, was very good. I always remember it. But you name dropped Justin Hawkins of The Darkness, which again was another band. While Busted might have been inspirational on one end, they really kickstarted that first album. Permission to Land was like somebody had taken Justin Hawkins in like 1972 and frozen him and then brought him out 30 years later. He was just like this guy from another time. And that music was, there were a lot of old school rock people that were really into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think The Darkness were absolutely fantastic. Justin Hawkins has a voice like no other. And still does. It's still actually very recognizable, because when he was on The Masked Singer, I figured it out before they'd masked it. I heard his falsetto on one of the songs, and I was like, there's only one man on planet Earth that has that falsetto, and it is Justin Hawkins. The Darkness were absolutely amazing. They influenced so many. There used to be a band down our way in Wigan called Smiths and Kitten. And they were basically a Darkness 5 years on. That's what they were. That glam cheese pop was, but very heavy, guitar driven. You had the white Les Paul, and the singer used to wear like a gi on stage, and it was this really long, like 2 meter long hair. I just went everywhere. Always smelled lovely though. I still don't know to this day what shampoo he used. But it gave rise to so much and influenced so many. And that's what's great about the early noughties in terms of music, because you got to think as well. So bands like Blink-182 and stuff became huge, especially at that point, especially the mid 90s to early 2000s. They were popping. They were incredible, and that then itself gave rise to bands in America like All Time Low, to Panic at the Disco, to even I don't know if I'm right here, but you can hear some forms of that music in My Chem, all of it, and something just, it's just incredible. And it all was very, very, very popular at that time, and it had a bit of a resurgence, when 5 Seconds of Summer came about in 2014 and released that amazing pop punk album that they'd written with Blink-182 and All Time Low and all these amazing pop punk greats, and they took that back into the mainstream, right? And so they did the album with John Feldman, who then did the Blink-182 2016 album California, which is the best Blink-182 album, just is. There's no question. And All Time Low did a pretty good album that year. Green Day did a pretty good album that year. There was this emergence of sound. John Feldman who was actually, I think, is it Goldfinger, the band, that do all like the trumpets and stuff, the ska punk. Like, he's in that band, but he's also so well known as this producer who's doing like these amazing things.
Yeah, and it all seems to kick off, as you say, in the mid-90s to mid-noughties. Loads of bits and pieces. How many bands, local bands, have you heard do all the small things?
My own old local band used to do all the small things. Everyone knows it, it's such an easy song to play. It was quite funny, actually, because I had my own Charlie Simpson moment back in 2013. Because my first ever band that I ever joined was an acoustic ska punk band called Venture. And I was 15, 16, playing the ukulele. I played the ukulele and the banjo because my specialties are folk instruments. So I thought, well, I'll put this to good use. And we did really good. We were a 9-piece at one point. Loads of us couldn't fit us on a stage. But it was always very nice music. Do you know what I mean? It was very nice. My mum loved it. And if my mum loved it, I knew that I wasn't being rebellious enough. So I left. And I thought, I was like, screw you, I'm going to make something you hate. And I formed a pop punk band. At first we were called Indiana, which sucked because literally a week after we launched, a female singer called Indiana emerged. She had a publishing deal, all of it, and we had to change our name to Pray for the Weekend. And this was before the weekend was a thing, so we had it. It was good, and we always played all the small things. Always, we did. And because that was I felt like that was my Charlie Simpson moment. That was my playing this ukulele is not fulfilling me anymore. Give me a bass and a distortion pedal on the bass and a wireless pack so I can jump off stage and feel alive at a gig. And I've never felt actually more alive than I have at some of those gigs that we played with. And it's the power of the kind of music as well. Pop rock, it's so fantastic. And I'll say what the first song we ever played live was Saturday Night by McFly. From the first album, because we were. What I'll do, I'll send you it. I'll send you it. Actually, I might even make it public because we never ever released it. But we were working on a single when my old band broke up. We never ever released it. We own all the rights to it, so I can leak it if I want. No one's going to be bothered.
It's funny because I thought that I'm going to get punked here. I thought you're going to say we did a cover of Saturday Night by Wigfield. That's what I was expecting. But no, that sounds interesting. And it sounds like, again, you've taken influence from those people that you heard when you were younger, which shows that even now, they still have the power. Because that's the thing. A lot of pop music, a lot of things that goes into the mainstream, pretty much people tend to write it off after 5 minutes. It's not going to last very long. One thing I've learned from doing this and when I used to be on music radio is you never write off music no matter where it came from, because somebody will always find influence there somewhere. Someone will be influenced. Someone might pick up a guitar. Someone might learn a dance routine. Somebody might learn to sing or even rap.
Absolutely. Hip hop is one of my secret passions. I love it so much. And again, let's go back to the early 2000s and talk about Slim Shady for a sec, because whenever I want to feel powerful, I will put on Eminem. Right, I will listen to the old quirky comedy stuff, more over to the newer, more hard hitting stuff like Recovery, especially Recovery. I love that album so much. Can't believe it's 10 years old. It's so powerful, hip hop, and so many people would just really mock Eminem, right? And a lot of my friends don't share the same music interests as me. So when I'm when I'm blasting Eminem or I've got my earphones, I'm like, what are you listening to? And listen to it, and it's Bad Meets Evil, Fast Lane. And they're like, what why are you doing this? I'm like, because you don't understand how it makes someone feel. And that's what a lot of people, in particular music snobs, right? And the music snobs, right? There's many of them. I usually quite find that some of my more, and I know they won't mind me saying this, but some of my more heavy metaler friends, so those with the long hair and the band t-shirts and all the denim and chains and spikes, they don't realize it, but are very, very snobbish towards other types of music, right? and in particularly hip hop, it's like they're sworn enemies, right? It's like if I went to one of my mates' house with Eminem in my earphones, I'd be shunned. They'd look at me weird. Do you know what I mean? I don't know why there's this massive rivalry, because I said to my mate, I said, so you listen to Megadeth and Metallica and Sabaton and these fantastic metal bands. I said, why do you listen to them? And they said, well, it makes me feel in control. It makes me feel powerful. I said, well, that's why I listen to Eminem. We're essentially we want the same feeling, just different drug. Do you know what I mean? But they don't get it. And I feel like so many music snobs so write off that early 2000s quirky hip hop, but there wouldn't be a world turning today without early 2000s hip hop.
No, I can admit I wasn't a fan then, but I do have a liking for Lose Yourself in particular.
Yeah.
You have to appreciate somebody who's able to use the terminology, spit out rhymes at a very fast rate. And I particularly like the way that some pop punky type bands do that as well. Well, they'll have, it's almost like a musical type thing. It's like, you know, when they're like talk singing in musicals. That's kind of what it's like, but they're doing it in double speed.
Well, it's poetry. It's just modern poetry. That's hip hop. It's, you know, people in the 1600s, they go to Hyde Park Corner to watch the poets. Now you go to the O2 Arena to watch Eminem or other fantastic rappers. Grime's not something I've ever been able to get behind. I don't feel like it doesn't make me feel anything personally, and that's fine. I can appreciate it. I won't turn it off. But in particular, the old hip hop is so good for the soul. I find, like, and you know, I've had it questioned to me before, which is how can you like Eminem, given, you know, the things he says and the language he uses and the offensive slurs he does? Well, Eminem's, he's almost, especially in particular those early songs like Without Me, and you know, he was a caricature. He was taking the mick out of white rappers, and again, it's that whole thing of, you know, because I got some backlash on Twitter when I once posted an Eminem song, and someone was inevitably, because you can't, you know, someone will always have something to say on Twitter. So I posted an Eminem song, and someone was like, "How dare you?" So I was like, "Oh, it's going to be a good day." So and I was like, "Well, what's your problem with it?" And it's like, it's very offensive. And I'm like, "Well, you do know it's a mockery. You know, if you ever watched Spitting Image or 2D TV or any of these like fantastic sort of mockery shows, like it's just that. It's essentially satire. It's just more urban. It's more urban satire, and that's essentially what Eminem was. And they eventually calmed down and decided that I wasn't actually evil. It's hip hop. It's fantastic. I love it so much.
Well, what a varied conversation this has been. We started off going, "Yay, busted." Yeah, McFly, and we've gone into hip hop. But you see, this is what I was saying to you before we started, is that you might be into one thing. You might be a fan of Busted or McFly or The Killers or whatever, but you do also like, I like all those bands, but I also like Blue and Boyzone and S Club 7. I like Vanilla Ice. So, you know, it's variety, definitely. And you make reference to you being a radio presenter. I think you need it when you're on the radio.
Yeah, and I think radio is great. Being a radio presenter is amazing because it gives you, I believe, a much stronger passion for the music, because not only because a lot of people listen to music for themselves, but then as a radio presenter, you're not just selling the song to yourself. When you listen to it, you have to sell it to your audience. And I feel like that can make one develop a stronger attachment to the song in question.
I think we'll call it there. But thank you so much for being on the podcast today, Danny. And give a small plug to your radio show.
Oh, so I now present Friday afternoons 1 till 3 on 96.5 Bolton FM. I have a podcast that will be launching probably at the end of September. It's nothing to do with music. It's going to be about a topic that I've never spoken in public forums about before, which should be very interesting. But I've got that coming up. And I run a dice shop. So if you need dice, buy your dice from me at the Frog and Flute.
Excellent. What a varied conversation that turned out to be. Thank you, Danny, for joining me on the podcast. And like I say, with every subject that we cover, don't worry, McFly, Busted, and everything else mentioned in that conversation will be covered again at some point. And if you would like to be a guest on the podcast, then you can email, you can tweet, and you can Facebook message us as well. And just let me know if you'd like to come on and talk about a particular subject. Right. Now it's time for this. Right, now it's time for the section known as the Empty Compartment. 3 questions, 1 guest, all 90s and noughties related questions. The more random, the better. And my guest today is podcaster Jack Haywood from Jack's Throwback Attack, which is a wonderful podcast based around kids' television of the 90s and 2000s. And thank you for joining us today, Jack. How did you get started with podcasting?
So basically, I've always had an interest in radio. I've been a volunteer in radio for nearly 10 years, since I was 17. And I'm a big fan of nostalgia. I have happy memories of watching CITV as a child and later on CBBC. And as I got older, all those shows finished, and this was around about the mid-2000s. Started browsing YouTube, for old clips and, to remember stuff. And at some point, I kind of thought, well, I want to kind of put this knowledge and interest to some use. So over the years, I tried various things like different blogs and other projects that never really took off. And then back in 2018, I decided to start a blog all over again. While writing the blog, I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to do a bit of podcasting as well alongside it? And I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. Originally, it was just going to be me and a friend discussing our memories of various shows, and I did like a few pilots, and they were pretty rubbish. So I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to try and get some of the people involved in those classic shows to be on the podcast and chat with me? Like I say, I volunteer in radio. I volunteer at a place called WCR based in Wolverhampton, and I asked the manager there if he'd allow me to borrow the studios to do this project, and he said yes. And I didn't really expect it to go very far, but I started emailing various people back in 2018, and amazingly, most of them responded and said, yes, love to talk about various kids' TV shows that we're involved with. Here we are a couple of years later. I've done 2 series, and there is a 3rd on the way, and it's been great fun.
I can say that that podcast is well worth checking out, and I do recommend it for those who are fans of CITV, CBBC, and any related subjects. Now on to the main point of this section. I will now ask a question that is 90s and noughties related. We discuss it for a few minutes, then we move on to the next thing. So I knew that Jack was coming today. I knew that of the podcast that he presented, and I wanted to ask him something of relevance. So back in the day, Jack, when you were watching all of these shows on CITV, CBBC, what were you eating or drinking anything while you were doing it, or were you fixated on the screen?
Good question, that one. Definitely fixated on the screen for the most part, but I do have memories of eating very specific foods, watching CITV and drinking various drinks. This was kind of like the turn of the millennium. So the popular drink at that time was Sunny Delight, I have to say. Everyone was mad on that. In terms of the food, the staple diet of my tea times back then and for many years was turkey Twizzlers and potato smiley faces and occasionally microchips, which were, in retrospective, not that great. They were a bit bland, but that's what comes to mind when I think of what I ate watching television.
there's a lot of processed food there.
Yeah, not great, is it? Not great. I was a bit of a pussy eater as a child.
Sunny Delight, didn't they find that had chemicals or something in it, and it had to be taken off the shelves and rebranded?
I think the controversy is that they found out there actually wasn't much real fruit juice in there. It was very little fruit juice and a lot of syrups and oils and other rubbish and artificial colorings and sweeteners, which were all the rage back then. You don't get that in children's drinks or sweets anymore. Yeah, that's what I remember anyway. But and I do remember that there were various flavors of Sunny Delight as well. But these days, you very rarely see it, and if you do, it's just the standard orange flavor.
Yeah, it's very. I suppose because they had all of that controversy, it's best to keep it simple. And of course, Turkey Twizzlers have come back. Have you managed to bag yourself a box yet?
I haven't. I'd heard something about they were going to come back. I didn't know they actually had come back. So maybe that's something I'll have to look out for in the supermarkets.
Well, yeah, you'll have to relive it while watching Roger and the Rotten Trolls or something.
Absolutely. What a class show.
Yeah, I was really surprised actually to see that that's out on DVD now.
It is. And I was one of the ones who pre-ordered it as soon as I saw that. It was funny really because I've interviewed a few people who worked on that show. Maybe we'll go more into that a bit later on. But a couple of episodes are released on video, which I do have. But the idea of the whole lot being released just seemed a fantasy because although it was very big at the time, it's kind of been largely forgotten. And then all of a sudden, a couple of weeks later, there was this announcement that it was going to be released on DVD, released by an archive TV group called Kaleidoscope, who I know of, but I'm not a member of. But they obviously must have got a hold of the rights or the archive or something and released it. So fair play to them.
Yeah, I was quite surprised by that because I know of Kaleidoscope and they predominantly deal with a lot of 60s, 70s, 80s stuff. So that was an interesting thing.
Definitely. Yeah, I thought the same thing. I do know on the DVD there's an interview with Tim Firth, who was the writer. So I'm assuming that they must be good friends with him, and it happened that way somehow. I'm sure any fans of Kaleidoscope, if they're listening to this, will let me know or correct me on that one.
I'm sure. Well, that's my question. We got your answer. Sunny Delight, Turkey Twizzlers, all classic things. I'm sure that people can relate to, because I know that I had that experience myself, a very similar one. I'll now turn it over to you. So I'll say I haven't heard this question before. I don't know what's coming. So Jack, what's your question for this episode?
Well, it's kind of related to Rotten Trolls and saying about, shows that have been forgotten. Are there any shows that were on CITV or CBBC or any of the satellite children's channels that you remember fondly, but if you talk to your friends, no one's ever heard of it, and you just can't seem to find anybody else that knows this show, but you remember it so fondly? And isn't it frustrating when that happens? Do you ever experience that?
Yeah. I think many people that are interested in the subject have had that experience, although it's been a long time, because I speak to a lot of people like yourself who remember things like Addams Family Tree and the like, and poltergeists and all that sort of thing. But there are a few that if you spoke to the average person, they probably wouldn't remember. I didn't realise until CITV started rerunning some stuff in the early 2010s for their anniversary that Mike and Angelo and things like that were so fondly remembered. I thought that was really obscure.
Yeah, Mike and Angelo ran for over 10 years, and I had a few episodes on video, which I used to watch often. It was popular and it ran for a long time. I think it's one of those that is forgotten until you mention it or you play a clip of it, because I know a few people have said, oh, would you remember Mike and Angelo? And they go, no. But once I play a clip, once they see that shot of Angelo walking onto the ceiling and doing the juggling upside down, it all comes back to them then. Or the flying wardrobe, that you see at the start. So sometimes you just have to jog people's memory, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And, I can ask you that question, can't I? I mean, is there anything that you remember that perhaps nobody else does?
Yeah, there's a couple. In fact, I did a video once, and it was like 20 forgotten CITV shows of the 90s. I'm not going to list off 20. I've written down just a couple. Rotten Trolls was one of them, but we've pretty much discussed that now. But if you've never seen it, do check it out. So yeah, one of them being Have a Kazoo, which was on Milkshake, very, very early Channel 5. It was a daily morning show for preschool children on around about 7 in the morning. And it had a couple of presenters on it, and they lived in a windmill, and it had a character called Messi, who was a robot. And it ran for a couple of years, but that seems to be forgotten. There was also a show called Snug and Cozy, which was a slapstick comedy on CITV about two bumbling spacemen that spoke this gibberish language, which I had very vague visions of until years later when I come across a clip on YouTube uploaded by one of the people who wrote the show and starred in it, which was nice. A couple more, The Experimenter, which was a BBC learning program about science, which had an alien called XP, who was trying to find out about Earth with his friend Sarah. And then the other two were staples of Friday afternoons on CITV for a while. Two brilliant game shows. One called Pump It Up, which is all about inflatables, and Mad for It, which was a magazine show that had all various bits in it, and it was presented by a guy called Mike McLean. I remember both of those very fondly. So those are the ones off the top of my head, I'd have to say.
I remember Pump It Up and Mad for It, and Get Wet as well.
Yes, Get Wet was good. Simeon Corti has previously been a guest on the podcast, and he told some good anecdotes about the fact that it was filmed at a very run-down swimming baths in one of the worst parts of Glasgow, but it was the only place big enough to accommodate the set, which was a funny anecdote.
Yeah, I'm sure that the listeners out there will remember some of those shows. I can admit that I personally, some of those don't sound familiar, but a little bit like with Mike and Angelo, perhaps if I saw a clip, I would be more familiar. I remember those milkshake shows, because I know there were certain parts of the country where you couldn't get Channel 5, and I think we were one of them. So, some of it passed me by, but you're really digging deep there, I can tell.
It's what I like to do. I like to shine a light on the well-known shows, but then also go, what about this? And I do the same with the interviews. Like, I've had people on like Dave Benson Phillips, who has been asked about Get Your Own Back thousands of times. Yes, I asked him about Get Your Own Back in Play Days, but then I'd go, but what about Pet Swap or Wake Up in the Wild Room? And I don't think he was expecting somebody to ask him questions about those shows. There was. I remember there was this moment where there was just a couple of seconds silence, and then just yes. So that was nice.
It is true, though, when you do interview these people, you are wary that you're almost repeating what has already been heard, and you're trying to find another angle. I remember Dave actually from, was it Playhouse Disney he did for a while?
Yes, I remember that very well. Yeah, and he did a cookery show as well called Bite Size, which was on Playhouse Disney. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for asking that question. So it's the listener question, and today it comes from Matthew, and he knows that we're both massive Art Attack fans, and he wanted to ask us kind of what our memories were of the TV show Art Attack presented by Neil Buchanan.
Absolutely. One of my all-time favourite shows. Memories of Art Attack. Where to start, really? Because I've been a fan of it all my life. So much so, the 30th anniversary was this year, and I did do a video on YouTube, which is kind of like a little bit of a documentary about the show, detailing facts about it. And I had to go through lots and lots of clips about of the show to highlight it. Trying to think of like the ones that really stick out for me. Because I remember watching it on CITV, and then I'd watch it on the Disney Channel because they used to show all the very old ones on there at the same time. The only thing I've ever made of Art Attack was something called a garbage gobbler, which was a monster-shaped bin made of paper mache. There was also I had a video called CITV Favourites, which had an episode of Art Attack on. I remember there was something called 3D Noughts and Crosses, which was Noughts and Crosses again, made out of paper mache. Wax resist pictures I did a lot of, and it was just such a good show. It was really eye-catching, it was bold, and it made art really fun. It inspired a generation of children, not just here, all around the world. And it's amazing, really, from just an idea for an art show ended up turning into an international phenomenon, which made Neil Buchanan and his business partners millionaires when they sold it off. It's an absolutely incredible story, I think.
It wasn't just him in the studio either. He got out and there was that weird head thing that was it called just The Head?
The Head, yeah. Puppeteered by a guy called Francis Rice. And again, previous guest on my podcast, and a very, very lovely guy. He did it for the best part of 12, 13 years, sat in that box. He really was inside the box with his arm up in the head and voicing it at the same time as operating it, with a monitor down by his feet. And that was very funny. And like you say, going outside, the big pictures, the big art attacks. I think the one that most people remember is the picture of the Queen out of £250,000 in real money, and also ones like trying to think off the top of my head. There was the one in New York where he did a picture of Santa across the Manhattan skyline. My favourites were always the ones where he drew using salt or lentils against like a plain black or white background. And there was one where he did a Chinese dragon out of lentils, and I always liked that one. I thought that was very good. And Neil is the one person I'd love to have on the podcast, but it hasn't happened yet, but never say never. I do try every now and again.
Well, Neil, I mean, talking about subjects, you'd have so many places to go because, he did Art Attack. He was also in Zap, and he did Number 73 as well.
Yeah. An incredible story, really. I kind of highlighted that when I did the video, because he started out wanting to be a musician originally, which didn't work out for him. So he was looking for work, and he spotted an advert looking for people that wanted to be a part of a new Saturday morning show. He applied for it. He got the job. Off the back of that, he got to know some people who worked at the TV studios, and a couple of years down the line, he decided to pitch an idea for an art show, and the rest, they say, is history.
Indeed, and happy birthday, Art Attack. It's 30 years this year, and it's kind of a shame that due to some legal wranglings, they won't be able to even release any of the early episodes because of that.
Yeah, the whole TVS thing. That is a very confusing thing that I just don't understand or get into. I know it's a hot topic amongst fans of classic TV.
Oh, definitely. So, sadly, Art Attack may remain unseen, although saying that there is a Disney version now.
Yes, they did do a remake, didn't they? I mean, Disney had done the international versions originally when, at the same time as Neil doing the UK version, they filmed it in the same studio. But then once Art Attack had finished and the media merchants folded, and it was sold to a company called, it was sold to Britt Allcroft, and then it went to Ghislaine, and then it was passed on to Hit Entertainment. And Disney still wanted to carry on showing it, so they bought the rights off Hit Entertainment and continued making it for the international market and did their own British remake. I know there's a lot of people out there that would say, that's wrong, you can't do that, it's Neil's show. But it's I guess it was for a new audience, and you have to kind of sometimes move on and realise, that was then, this is now. Things move on sometimes, and you have to accept that. But yeah, no, great show, and very, very fond memories of watching it. And if you ever go on my blog page, you'll see that a couple of times I've gone to Comic-Con and cosplayed as Neil, dressed in a red Art Attack sweatshirt with a pencil. I don't really look anything like him, but it was good fun to do. Lots of people come up to me wanting photos, which was great fun.
Excellent. Well, thank you to Matthew for asking that question, and thank you to Jack for joining me today. And if you want to check out his podcast, it's Jack's Throwback Attack. It's available on all your favourite podcast providers and also YouTube. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
And once again, I'd like to say thank you to my guests for this episode, Danny Simm and Jack Haywood. And be sure to join me on the next episode, due same time, same place next week.
Thank you for listening to 90s and Noughties UK, a podcast on UK pop culture of the 90s and 2000s. Please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe on your favourite podcast provider. If you want to contact the show, email 90esandnoughties@gmail.com, tweet us on @90esandnoughties UK on Twitter, or check us out on Facebook, 90s and Noughties UK.